Hello, and welcome to Matriculate's November webinar. I'm really excited to have everyone who's able to join live, and for those of you watching later, thank you for making the time as we really dive into this key stretch run on the college application process. This is so much fun, and I'm excited to go through this with you guys. As we go into this really vital stretch, this is what we're hoping to accomplish and going to accomplish, and that you walk away with this webinar with these three goals in hand. One, that you're prepared to support your students through application deadlines while also getting a better understanding of what the perspective of an admissions office might look like during the cycle. We're also going to look through some of the common pitfalls that you can spot in a college application. And then lastly, how you as an advising fellow in your role can ensure that you have seen and been given a balanced college list from your students, but not that you've only seen that college list, but that they are also following through and applying to that list fully. For today, we're going to go through and let's really kind of talk about what's the plan to how we're going to get there. But I'll give some quick highlights into community development within a few of our campus fellowships. I'm also really excited to have Farish from Emory join to give her perspective on the process. We'll also dig back into your role as an advising fellow during winter break and how to really set yourself up for success, but more importantly, also how to keep your sanity during this period when working with high school students. And then lastly, how does the checklist come into play for all of this, and how can we use that to be organized into what we're doing? Community. To kick off, some really huge shout outs to all of those, working with your students, but then also kind of setting the tone for your campus fellowships. I think all of us at headquarters have thoroughly enjoyed seeing you engage with your respective communities. I think it's really important for us to call out and acknowledge that the work that you're doing can feel isolating, and really by leveraging your cohort's network, it doesn't mean that you're going to our social events to be the social butterfly, but understanding that the experiences of your peers and being more connected and feeling more invested into the program is how you can really be the best advisor possible. So shout out to some folks already running those community events. Some pictures here are from our high school fellow welcome events from Notre Dame and UC Berkeley. And then special shout out to our recruitment folks at Columbia, struggling through the rain to get more folks to sign up as an advising fellow. But without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Farish Rahman, the Associate Dean of Admissions at Emory. And then, sorry, everybody. Sorry, Farish.
No worries.
Let's go from here. It's usually not that clunky, but I will let you take it from here. Thank you so much again for joining us. Really excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So again, my name is Farish German. I'm an Associate Dean of Admission at Emory University, and always excited for any opportunity to share transparency and insight about the admission process, what happens to a student's application when they arrive to an admission office. I am going into my ninth year, currently in my ninth year, I should say, so I have definitely read my fair share of applications. And I'm excited about this collaboration with Matriculate. Just really admire and appreciate all the work that's being done to support high school students as they move through the college search and application process, and especially the work that y'all are doing as advisors and advocating for them and helping them understand this process, and really joining a broader initiative that I think is at the forefront of a lot of minds in colleges and universities right now as we think about knowledge share, and even more importantly, equity of knowledge share. So very excited to be with you guys here today. I know we have a couple of things that we want to talk about, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end of my section for some Q&A. So if you're thinking of any questions along the way, please definitely make note of those. I'm happy to engage as long as we have the time for. But we do have a couple of things we want to make sure we cover in the vein of demystifying the college application review process. So we will talk about whole person review, also known as holistic admission, some good do's and don'ts to keep in mind for your advisees as they move through the application process, and then also some considerations for when students should be reaching out to or contacting the admission office. So without further ado, let's dive into holistic admission and whole person review. So I think the best place to start is just with the most basic definition, which is basically saying if a college or university is using holistic review or whole person review, they're saying that no one single metric or aspect of a student's application is going to alone dictate their admission decision. But beyond that, holistic admission or whole person review can look really different at different institutions. And I think that's an important thing for students to realize, because I can understand why high school students might get overwhelmed by so many colleges and universities of varying sizes and locations, as well as selectivity, are suddenly talking a lot about holistic review. And it can kind of give the impression that this looks like the same admission process at a lot of places. And that's not necessarily true. You know, students can know that, okay, not one thing is dictating admission, but then they need to know for each college and university they're looking at, well, what are the factors that are being taken into account? And are there certain factors among several that are more important to this particular institution that they feel are a, quote, better predictor of college success at their institution? And to dig a little bit deeper into this and have that understanding. And I think it's also important for students to kind of emotionally prepare themselves on the front end that holistic review can be a bit of a double-edged sword. Well, I think there's a lot of relief for them in realizing that whatever they think is the weakest component of their application, whatever that might be, you know, they're hearing that it alone is not going to dictate their admission decision. And it's a big relief, understandably. The flip side of that, though, is that whatever they think is the strongest component of their application is also not alone dictating their admission decision. And that is an ambiguous, uncomfortable landscape to stand in throughout an admission process for students. And I think it's important for them to understand the nuance of holistic review and realize there is no algorithm, there are no guarantees of specific decisions, but there are ways in which you can understand how a school is evaluating your application, even within that holistic context. So let's dive a little bit deeper into holistic review or whole person review. If it's okay if we advance to the next slide. So I'm going to use Emory as an example, both because it is where my admission experience comes from. This is the only institution I've worked for, but also because our admission process is guided by holistic review and whole person review. So this fits well into the wheelhouse of our dialogue today. And this is a new graphic that we actually came out with this year, and I really, really like it for a couple of reasons. The first is that you can clearly see all the elements that we're taking into account in our holistic review process. But at the center there is that academic preparation. And I think that's important because I think sometimes students hear holistic review and kind of get the impression that academics matter less or just aren't as important. And I don't think that's what we're saying as institutions that are using holistic review. I think we're reassuring students that those metrics aren't going to stand in a vacuum by themselves. They're going to be looked at alongside all these other factors, but also within a much more textured landscape. We're going to look at curriculum within the context of what does the school offer or advise students to take or allow them to take. We're going to look at the GPA within a grade distribution, thinking about how is it inflated, how is it deflated, how does that work in that school context. We're going to look at test scores in a school and state and regional context. You know, all of this context can really change the narrative around metrics. So I think it's important for students to realize that with holistic review, it's not negating the importance of academic preparation. It's giving it so much more context and understanding alongside these other components. And it's also important to note that colleges that are using holistic review processes may prioritize different academic components more. You know, at Emory, we are putting more emphasis on rigor of curriculum and grades within the school context, because in our minds, how a student has performed and challenged themselves within the context of a classroom for 4 years is a better predictor of success at our institution than their standardized test score. And I certainly don't think we're the only college that thinks that. But all of this to say it's another layer of nuance for students to be kind of parsing out and how a holistic review process might look different from institution to institution. So if we move to this outer ring now, let's start with non-academic engagement. This is another thing I really like about this graphic because we're getting away from this narrow terminology of activities or extracurriculars. And in this vein, I'm talking about that page that you see on every application platform, whether it's QuestBridge, Common App, Coalition, where students can kind of laundry list what they're doing outside of class. And I think when it's just called activities or extracurriculars, students can sometimes think too narrowly about what am I doing in school outside of class, and not take the time to tell us some really great things they're doing outside of the school context entirely. So we're really hoping that this verbiage will help students kind of embrace, okay, this admission office wants to know everything that I'm doing when I'm not sleeping or sitting in a classroom, because all of that helps us understand a day, a week, a year, and a life, and really honor and recognize how this student is spending their time outside of classroom work. And all of that is going to be equally valid and recognized by us and valued by us in our work. So again, hopefully that verbiage gets students to think a little bit more broadly. We move over to letters of recommendation. We look at the counselor rec, and we also require 2 teacher recommendation letters. And that's because we feel like these 2 types of recommendation letters give us different but equally important information. The counselor rec is great to have a bird's eye view of who a student is in their community, how they've grown over their 4 years of high school. But I also want to recognize that a lot of students in our applicant pool, and many students you might work with throughout your time as an advisor, may go to a school that has too many students and too few resources and staff. And there may not be a counselor who can write a letter of recommendation on their behalf. And I want to reassure you, that's not disadvantaging a student in our admission process. That's not that student's fault. It's also not that counselor's fault. That's a resource issue. But that is one of many reasons that we ask for the 2 teacher recommendation letters, to ensure that every student has someone advocating for them that can do so and knows them in that context. But even if we do have that counselor rec that can be so much more personal quality focused, character focused, big picture, the teacher recs are still helpful because they give us more insight into who this person is as a student, how they're engaging with academic content, their peers, their professors, and we can kind of extrapolate to who they might be in our classrooms, kind of getting at, are they active in their education? Do they love to learn? And I think this is becoming a particular point of distinction for a lot of selected colleges and universities, as our applicant pools are just really burgeoning with accomplished students. Like, who's showing up because it's a passion and because they are really taking advantage of all their opportunities and resources at their current institution, and we can trust that they're going to come and do that at our institution. That's really compelling. So if we move along this outer ring to the student writing samples, that's going to encompass everything from that big college essay personal statement that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute, as well as any short answers, even things that are just 1 to 2 sentence responses. All of this obviously is showing proficiency in writing, but it's kind of the human resonance of this process. And I think that's important in the college admission process that has become, I think, to feel a little bit dehumanizing for high school students when they're all checking the same boxes, jumping through the same hoops, feeling like one person in this massive sea of people looking at any given institution. This is their chance to breathe some of their individuality and personality into their application and make it feel like their own. And we look for that too as a team of human beings that's trying to create a community of human beings in the form of a freshman class that we hope will continue to make our institution a better and better place. This is an important point for us in the application to understand, who is this person? Who is this human being outside of all these kind of factual information and these metrics? How does that kind of round all of this out? So also an area that can be very compelling in holistic review process and getting to know the human being that goes along with this application. And then these last 2 components, intellectual curiosity and personal attributes, are harder to articulate because they're kind of nebulous, but they also exist across the entire application. You can find evidence of these in so many different places throughout the application. And that kind of gets at the conversation of this. We're talking in holistic review about all of these different components and talking as a group of counselors and trying to kind of understand who this person is. And that's at every point in the process, whether we're sitting in the first read committee where it's a couple of admission counselors, including the person who's the territory rep for this school or for that state where that school is located, and can bring what we call a sense of expert advocacy and context to the admission conversation, or if this application is being looked at in subsequent committees with different admission counselors and a totally different set of students around whose applications are now around that student's application. And my whole point is this dialogue about holistic review takes place every step of the way in this process. But in interest of time, I want to go ahead and segue to our next topics of conversation, and we can answer additional questions about holistic review if need be down the road. But if we can go ahead and move to our next slide. Perfect. So I loved the idea of talking about application pitfalls because obviously I'm in the midst of reading a lot of applications. So it's fresh on my mind, and I'm finding myself when reading some applications thinking, oh, I just wish the student had done this, or I just wish they'd told me this. So this is really good timing. And I feel like a lot of these pitfalls, so to say, could fall into 3 different categories: assumptions, lack of authenticity, and then that kind of daunting college essay personal statement. And what I mean by assumptions is students, high school students, making assumptions about what we, admission counselors or colleges, want to see or want them to be in order to be compelling for admission. So an example of this would be academic interests. I think it's easy for high school students to think, what is the school known for? I'm going to be that. I'm going to be that thing, and that will be really compelling to them. And I don't think this is always a good way to approach this process. And the example I'll give is that a lot of people think about healthcare when they think of Emory University because of Emory Healthcare. And that's a wonderful part of our institution. And certainly we're a great place for students interested in healthcare. But I wouldn't want a student to approach their application to Emory and think, okay, I've got to try to show Emory that I am going to go into healthcare, or I am really, really interested in the natural sciences or something healthcare related, to be more compelling or more competitive. I don't think that serves that student well, and it's not terribly helpful for us as an admission committee. I'd much prefer them to just be authentic in their interests and kind of talk about whatever they're actually excited about on their application, or put in that area of academic interest whatever they're genuinely excited about, which works well because we're a liberal arts college. I'm just as excited to read applications from students who want to major in English and history and anthropology and the languages as I am students who want to major in neuroscience and organic chemistry. So all that to say, I hope students feel confident to approach this process in an organic way. And then another area that I'm seeing it is that non-academic engagement that we touched on with holistic review, where I think students are making assumptions about what's going to be interesting to us or unique in our pool. And they just can't know that because they can't see our pool. There's 30,000 people in our pool from around the globe. They can't know what's going to be unusual in our pool, especially when they're writing their application. So I'd rather a student approach this thinking, how do I give the information that's going to be needed to give me the most fair and ethical review possible? And in terms of this non-academic engagement, it means talking about everything. Even if it seems common in a student's context, they may look around and say, everybody I know has a part-time job outside of school. This is just common in my community. We'd still want to know that, even if they feel like it's not particularly standout in their context. I find that students are often uncomfortable writing about family responsibilities, for example, where they're helping take care of younger siblings or an elderly dependent in the household. They feel as if they're going to come across like they want credit for doing something that you just do for family. It's just what you do. And that's not how we see it. We don't feel like students are saying, hey, give me credit for doing this. We want to honor and recognize all the different valuable ways that students are spending their time and look at this point of engagement and passion and impact and say, what a wonderful community member and a supportive community member that we'll be lucky to have on our campus. So I hope if you're advising students who are doing things that take up a lot of time and are really meaningful outside of the traditional school activity context, that they're really kind of embracing that and talking about that in the non-academic engagement section, because there's so many cases where I'm only finding out about jobs or family responsibilities from letters of recommendation. And I'm sure there are times, where students are engaging in it and not talking about it, and neither are their rec letters, and then we never know. So as much as you can encourage that when you come across it, it's very helpful. And then curriculum choices. I think a lot of times students assume we know everything about their curriculum and read their minds about why they chose to do what they did. And that is definitely not the case. We know a lot about schools. We work really hard to be experts in this area, but we can't know every school, and we definitely can't know why a student may have decided to take this class versus that class. So if you're sitting with your advisee and they're talking to you about some unusual curriculum choices they've made, it would be great if they tell us that on the application, and we wouldn't have to wonder why they chose to take something or didn't choose to take something. And I think that's an important point of advocacy, period, is if a student thinks there's anything about their application that we may wonder about as an admission office, tell us what to think. Tell us how to interpret that. Own that narrative. Don't let us make an incorrect assumption. So then that second pitfall is lack of authenticity. And we've touched on that a good deal, but the closure I would want to bring to that statement is it is so easy for a student's voice to get lost in this process. You know, oftentimes they're surrounded by a lot of well-meaning individuals who want to help them, quote unquote, make their application better. It's such a good intention. I'm not trying to cast aspersion in any way, but I'm surprised, honestly. It's one of the things that surprised me the most when I started working in admission, how quickly you can tell when you're reading an application when a student has kind of lost control of the application and it's a hodgepodge of a lot of other people's voices and good intentions, but you're missing the opportunity to get to know the student and sort of see who this person is. So as much as you can encourage your advisees to be open to feedback, obviously, use the resources around them, but really own their application, make it their own, make it organic, make it authentic. It's very helpful in the process. And this is a nice dovetail into that college essay and personal statement component that I think students are often so intimidated about, and reasonably so, because I think admission officers have been saying for a long time, you know, be memorable and unique in 650 words or less, which is terrifying and kind of unattainable. I wish if we could rebrand this, we would say things like, try very hard to be yourself in 650 words or less, which is still a tall order, but it is attainable with time and introspection for any student that wants to do that. And that's really much more helpful because I think after this point in time, I've read every kind of topic a student could choose to write reasonably on a college essay that there is. And I've seen every single topic turn into just a good piece of writing about the topic or turn into a really impactful, compelling personal statement. And the difference between those two outcomes was not the topic. It was how the student used it. Did they use it as the entirety of their essay, or did they use it as a vehicle for them and see how they think about things, see how they see the world? And having that insight, again, that point of human resonance, I think is such a pivotal part of this process and can be so helpful. So last but not least, I want to talk about considerations for reaching out to an admission office. And I've included a couple of instances where it could go either way. So we're going to kind of talk through some questions that advisees could ask themselves or that you could pose to them when they're saying, hey, should I reach out to an admission office about this? So the first thing is offering additional information. I think students are constantly stressed about whether we have everything we need to give them the best review possible. So first rule of thumb is if they have not sent in their application, anything additional that's not requested that they'd like to include, they can put in the additional information section. Again, whether they apply via QuestBridge, Common App Coalition, there's literally a section called additional information where they can put all of that and it lives inside the application, which is great. It's very convenient. If the application's already been sent in, then next they should look at whether that college has made it possible for them to add information on their own. A lot of colleges like Emory have committed to technology that allows students to have a portal to their application and add additional information and cut out the middleman, which would be me in this case, or a colleague on my processing team. Add that stuff on their own. We'll see it when we read the application, but they can add it on their own time whenever they want. If that's not a possibility, that's when I think a student's doing a real gut check and saying, is this necessary for me to have the fairest, most ethical review possible? If yes, then reaching out to the admission office about that. The second instance would be demonstrated interest. And I want to be very clear, Emory University does not track demonstrated interest, but I would be remiss as an admission professional giving a general presentation and talking about when to reach out to an admission office if I didn't talk about demonstrated interest, because there are still a lot of institutions that do track demonstrated interest. And what that means, in case anyone here hasn't heard that term before, is that an admission office is taking into account how excited a student seems about their institution, how much they have demonstrated their interest when making their admission decision. In short, if that student has had a lot of contact with that office and really shown they're excited about that institution, they may have a higher chance of admission, meeting other criteria. So I think every single high school student should know definitively for every college or university to which they're going to apply, does this college track demonstrated interest or not? Yes or no? And if it's yes, ideally they should go visit that place. If they can, if they're mobile and financially able, that's the best thing. And then have a record of that visit, either through online registration in advance or through filling out a card while they're there. Understandably, that's not possible for every single student. So then another great point of contact is to engage with that admission counselor when that person comes to their high school or is in their city for a program. Again, fill out a card. online registration, have a record of that contact and that visit. For many students, this is also not possible because they may live remotely and not be as mobile, and admission counselors are not getting out to remote areas as much as possible. So in that sense, that's a great time to reach out to an admission office, and have that point of contact and engagement. So the last thing I want to talk about is institutional information request. And this can be for a number of things. It basically means a student wants more information. But I think the first thing they need to figure out is why. If it's because of demonstrated interest, if they're thinking, okay, I've got to show this college that I'm interested, I'm going to ask them a question. That's not necessarily the best way to show demonstrated interest. If it's a question you can find on the website, I should have started with that. Beginning part of institutional information request. Just don't ask anything that's on the website. I would hope that every student would be looking at the website in advance to be sure that they were kind of moving beyond that content. So if they're trying to express demonstrated interest, they don't have to ask an arbitrary question. They could just simply say, this is me, I'm introducing myself. I'm so excited about potentially attending your institution. I've sent my application in. Here's a couple things I'm really excited about your school. That's great. That is demonstrated interest. They don't have to necessarily ask a question, especially if they don't truly have a question. But understandably, some students do have additional questions. There may be information or aspects of a college that are going to dictate whether they apply at all or whether they would attend if they were admitted. And in that case, we are happy to be points of resource and insight. I'm always happy when a student reaches out and says, hey, how a college handles XYZ is an important part of where I'll choose to attend. And I've looked on the website, I found ABC, but I need a little bit more information. Can you point me in the right direction? Totally happy to do that. So the gut check really comes around what's the motivation for reaching out, and is it information you can find somewhere else? And I think that's everything we were hoping to cover at this point. So I definitely want to go ahead and pause and just see if there's any questions we would like to talk about.
Thank you so much, Farish. I don't have any questions from the group right now. I did want to take a moment to pause and just, if you did want to ask Farish any questions, feel free to type that into the chat box right now. But Farish, I think if I could ask you a question from when we talked last week, and just kind of like for students on being able to advocate for themselves and how a curriculum might not really totally translate into their academic ability. I think one of the things that we spoke about on like a student who might not be taking their full AP course load during their senior year in high school, but might have been instead recommended to take dual enrollment classes at a local community college. And so like, as an admissions officer, like how would you want a student to kind of talk about that experience? Or like, does a student need to talk about their dual enrollment experience? Or like, how would they really kind of navigate that situation on trying to at least advocate that, yes, they had AP classes available, but instead decided to do this path instead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's an increasing number of high schools that have multiple types of curriculum available for students to consider engaging in. And each college will kind of have their preferences to what they think is the best preparation for academic success. We're looking at Emory for students to have taken the highest curriculum available at their school. If they had every opportunity under the sun, we kind of feel like AP and IB are really good academic preparation, but we totally recognize that not all schools offer that curriculum, and there are other ways that a student can prepare themselves adequately to be successful at Emory. However, in the sense that we're talking about now, in this particular instance, a student may have AP available at their school, for example, but also have dual enrollment opportunities. And there are definitely certain pockets of the country, certain states, where there is a lot of encouragement in high schools for students to go ahead and do more dual enrollment because they may get more credit in college, especially if they attend an in-state public institution. They may be able to really curtail the amount of time they're spending in college and how much money they're going to spend on a college degree. And I think we just don't want to fault students for following the advice they're being given. And we don't want to make an assumption that a student has avoided AP classes to do dual enrollment instead, or even assume that those dual enrollment classes are quote unquote easier than the AP classes would have been. We don't want to make any of those assumptions incorrectly or unnecessarily. So I think it is really helpful when students are their own advocate and talking additional information, for example, is a great place, and saying, you'll see that I took these couple of APs, I'm taking these things dual enrollment, or I've made this decision and it's because I thought these classes were the best preparation in this particular academic area, or my counselor told me that if I took these classes through dual enrollment, they would translate better to my in-state institution, and I just want to prepare myself the best I can for any potential college or university that I might attend. You know, we can't ever fault a student for that, and we would in no way expect a student to craft their entire high school curriculum around what we might prefer to see or what we think is good preparation for college success. So I just think any of these cases where you're working with students, and especially dual enrollment is involved, oftentimes the school profile, which is a public document that's ideally on the school's website, not always. A counselor at the school should obviously have one if possible, and it's supposed to come with a student's application for admission for our office to look at and get that good school context and everything. Oftentimes we're finding that there's not a lot of curriculum information on those, and it may not even state where dual enrollment's taking place. So a big point of advice that I would give, if you have the time and you're working with a high school student who's involved in dual enrollment, if you guys can go find with them, ideally, find their profile, their school profile. That's the name of the document. Like I said, it's ideally on a school's website, easy to find. If not, they can ask their counselor for it and see if it's explicitly stated on there where dual enrollment is taking place. I'm only 2 weeks into reading applications, and I'm already shocked by how many applications I've read where a student's done a hefty amount of dual enrollment and it's not mentioned anywhere on the school profile or in the application where that's taken place. And I've had to go to the school's website to try to figure out, okay, what are their partner community colleges or technical colleges that I can figure out where the student has done their dual enrollment. So if you guys can help us in that way and also help students advocate for themselves in that way and give that information on the front end, I think that would be really helpful.
I think one thing to kind of follow up on too, Farish, in that additional information piece and like what that is there for. So like I think the examples that you're mentioning are perfect and really add additional context. Can you maybe speak to some of the mistakes that students will then use that additional information box for? I remember when I would work with students, they would ask me if that could be like an extension of their personal statement, and I would say no. But I was wondering if you have ever kind of seen that additional information piece like maybe not be used correctly or maybe not used in a way that was helpful, and like maybe what that was, so folks can like know to look out for that.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, an additional couple of 100 words to their personal statement is not super helpful. We like everyone to kind of stay at that 650 words or less, just for the sake of all of us staying on track for the work that we're doing. Obviously, additional information is great if students need to provide more context for why they got a grade they feel is not representative of their academic ability, or why they discontinued an activity, likely due to injury or something very straightforward and factual. I'm finding more and more that students are using additional information for additional writing assignments. And I hate to say, like, don't do that at all, because there have definitely been some cases where a student is applying and just all about creative writing. They're so excited about it. They love English, they love creative writing. And that additional writing piece was really cool to see, and actually really helpful in seeing like, wow, this is a really great English student or a potential English major or creative writing student. But I think students need to be really thoughtful, again, about that gut check of like, is this really necessary to give me the best and most fair and ethical review possible? And if not, I don't want to just add extra stuff to this counselor's plate to read through, because we do guarantee that we're going to read everything they send us, whether that's additional recommendation letters, whether that's more information in the additional info section. And we want to feel like it was all productive and helpful towards that larger picture of who that student is. Something I'm seeing more often too, which I do think is actually great, are research abstracts. If you're working with students who are already doing some high level research, better than just giving us their entire paper, which again, we've all gone to college. We have certainly read a lot of research, but we're not necessarily experts to read a full on research paper. That abstract and additional information that tends to be a little bit more layman's terms and a little bit more digestible about what that student's been engaged in and the caliber of their research is really helpful.
I'm going to check one last time to see if we have any questions, but don't think we have any. I am going to offer up your, if anyone does want to reach out to Farish for any additional information, you're more than welcome to contact us or me, and I'm definitely game to have these conversations with Farish and see if we can answer those questions separately. But really did want to thank you for taking the time and doing this with us and giving folks like an additional perspective as we're like deep into applications and as folks that last minute push for a regular decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And for what it's worth, in terms of reaching out to admission offices, I hope the takeaway is that we are very approachable. We are definitely a resource. I didn't want that last section of our conversation to scare y'all away or your advisees away. One thing I forgot to mention that I would definitely bear in mind as you talk to them, though, is it should be them reaching out. We're happy to talk to parents, but honestly, it's rare that we need to have a conversation with a parent that we couldn't have had with the student. And I think this is how students get used to multitasking in college, is by going ahead and, yes, doing everything they're doing day to day in high school while also reaching out to an admission office during business hours, like just figuring out how to make that work instead of counting on a parent to do it, because they're going to have to learn that skill eventually. And we do appreciate when they start stretching and flexing that muscle, even during the college application and search process with us. And we would rather be having that conversation with them than with the parent, obviously barring any kind of special case situation that requires parental insight, perhaps something financial aid related, for example. But for the most part, great to engage with students. Always happy to engage with y'all as well and support the work that you're doing. And thank you again for this collaboration and the time to talk about these important initiatives. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. A couple of housekeeping items as we continue on for advising support. As you all know about college application awards, you've been selected. You will have already have known by now if one of your students was or was not selected to be eligible to receive the college application awards through College Point. If you have any confusion on whether your students were or were not selected, or if you just would like a more specific list, please reach out to your campus lead to make sure that you have that info. But again, you should have this email letting you know which of your students were selected. And then again, for students who were not selected, you are explicitly not allowed to talk about college application awards with them, just for the integrity of the study. So you've gotten this information. What do you do next? So it's to review the program with them and to let them know that they are eligible for this award, and that if they apply to these schools and submit verification for them, they are able to then receive the financial reward. How do you let us know that? So in your session summaries for this month, there is a drop-down section to indicate that you have had this conversation with your high school fellow and that they have received this customized list of schools to apply to. And this customized list is also meant to help you in your advising as you continue to search for additional schools for them to advise. We will be in touch soon with what students need to specifically do to submit verification and receive the award. A special note in that this is different from the CMOS scholarship, and that by doing this, students aren't eligible to receive the money. They are just straight up receiving the funds by completing the task on the college application awards. So again, there is a lot to this, and a lot from the past webinar on the explicit, like how much money do they get, and what schools do they have to apply to. If you have any questions, always refer to that webinar from last month, or again, feel free to reach out to your campus lead for more information. With that, a quick CMOS update within the College Board. We are actually in the last stage of CMOS. If your student is able to indicate that they have applied to at least 2 schools, hint, all of them will have done this or do this, they become eligible to receive a $1,000 scholarship through the College Board, and the College Board is then giving 500 of these specific awards to them. For those of you who have been with us in the beginning with CMOS and since July and have been working with your students on just building the list, this is actually the last task that is included. So therefore, if they have all completed all 6 CMOS tasks and have reported that on their College Board account and have met that ideal checklist, your student then becomes eligible to receive the entire $40,000 scholarship. Again, this isn't a guarantee. If they complete all 6 tasks, it just puts them in the pool to be eligible for it. But College Board is giving away 25 of those scholarships for $40,000. So really, just exciting times, not because of just this program and the process that we've got through, but really just the fact that we have been talking about this award since July and really hitting that stretch in November. So really look at how far we've come, and that's incredible. Next thing that is up is discussing some college list feedback. Most of you who have had your students submit their college list have now received that feedback, and the ways to incorporate that in your advising is a very delicate process and something that we want to make sure that you are really aware of, and making sure that you're kind of coming into those conversations with good language, but also like relying on the relationships that you've created since the summer to really have an honest conversation with them. So the college list feedback is a tool in your advising, not the end all be all. But when you do use this list, you really want to keep it into a conversational conversation, like if that's not redundant, but really kind of saying, okay, we have this college list feedback, really let's like take a look at it and kind of see what we can take from it. The thing is with college list feedback is that this can be really personal. And something that Farish mentioned is that how important that academic piece is in assessing a student's readiness, but or ability to be able to attend a school. And so, if something on their feedback ends up being something like, oh, this is a very reach heavy list, to really come at that conversation in a real emotional, social way where they don't feel that they're kind of being attacked, or that feedback is like a detriment to them as a student, but really that this is just a part of the revision process and that you're hearing them. But the whole idea of this exercise is that when students come out of this process and are in the spring, that they don't get 7 rejection letters, but rather that they have options to choose from. So saying that, oh, your list is reach heavy, you're not going to get into this school, into these schools, might be a reductive way to handle this conversation, as opposed to, hey, this list is reach heavy. What are other options that we're looking at? Do these 7 reach heavy schools have the things that you're really looking for? Is this more of a name brand situation? Really kind of digging into like the weeds and understanding why a student has each school on their list, and being super intentional about what is on that list. So providing that context is really, really, really key. And so when you are making suggestions or edits, having to explain that why makes you come across as like a person who's like invested not into the school that they get into, but invested for them and their future success. So if a high school fellow does need more high graduation rate colleges, it isn't that, hey, you should apply to an HGR because it has HGR on it. It's speaking to a student's sensibilities and like what do they want to accomplish by going to school. So, and that will usually end up in the resources that an HGR school might be able to provide. And so by saying that, well, at X HGR school, they have this specific program and these study abroad programs that really speak to what you want to be able to do, and being able to provide and advocate for an option that meets like what they really want to get out of the school is the most healthy way to kind of engage in these conversations and kind of really treat this process as a more collaborative experience where you're both invested in each other's success, yours as an advisor and theirs as a student, to really understand what options they have available to them. And then lastly, I do want to underscore that this isn't about, did my student get into a high graduation rate school or not? And that is what defines me as an advisor. Your role here is to make sure that in the college list experience that your student has all the information and has the knowledge to really understand and make a decision for themselves to say, these are the financial safeties I want. These are the reach heavy ones that I want. Here are the reach schools that will offer full need that I'm really leaning towards. If a student is applying to all Ivies, that really is an indication that they haven't done the research on the differences between all those types of schools, and becomes a let's apply to all the Ivies. So being really intentional about which school you're applying to and why, and what resources I'm trying to get, or does this school's culture really appeal to me? Really, again, taking this conversation in a social emotional lens, but also being very intentional about that balance and that there is that scene in the spring where a student has an array of different options where they can compare financial aid packages and really be set up in a way that they feel like that they've gone through this process holistically and feel that they can come to a good decision. So that balanced list support. So what happens if your high school fellow doesn't really want to apply to a balanced list of colleges? And again, this isn't a reflection on you as an advisor, but the best way to kind of approach this is to start asking questions, right? I think we have run into a lot of situations where students are, starting to settle in, be into a plan where, oh, the state school is really kind of like where I want to apply to, and that's really it, or I want to go to the Navy or the Army, and that's really my only option. So by really having these honest questions about what else they would want, and what might be preventing them from applying to more colleges, and understanding that perspective is very key. Discussing financial aid is also very, very important. In the financial aid meetings that we went through last month, kind of understanding how an expected family contribution really does affect a student's college list. So, if a student's expected family contribution is 0, and they're expected to get the full, the full funding from a school or from a school that offers full need, then kind of understanding, is this school like a 1% admit rate, and does it make sense that even if your student's EFC is 0, that they just apply to all heavy reach schools and not really provide a safety option. The flip side of that is if a student's EFC might be somewhere towards the middle and not really having a financial safety here in case they were to get a poor financial aid package is really important here too. So again, financial aid is very much a key part of the process in establishing a balanced list of colleges. And really, again, you want to be able to transport yourself in the spring. Think about the acceptances that your student has gotten. Think about the financial aid packages that your student might get. And are they going to feel stuck and upset with the options that are, that they can pick from, or do they feel like they can make a good decision based off everything that they'll have? Fit, right? College fit is incredibly important to our students, and being able to facilitate this conversation is, I think, really the biggest impact that our advisors have, and being able to explore schools with their high school fellows. What do they like about their colleges on their list, right? Like if a student told you that they really like Harvard, ask why they like Harvard, and digging beyond just name brand recognition, but really like what are the classes or the professors or the atmosphere or the culture that a student might really want, to make sure that like they feel safe and good and comfortable and can see themselves there. And then lastly, if this is a lot of content heavy knowledge and we don't expect you to have the correct answer for every single situation, leverage your network here. Your head advising fellow is a great resource. Your campus lead is a great resource. They are here to help you navigate these really tough conversations. So if you do have a student who might be refusing to fill out the CSS profile, or have a student that's refusing to add any private schools to their list, that's a really tough situation, and these are situations that are happening, and I want to make sure that you feel comfortable enough as an advisor to really ask for help in that situation. And it might mean that a student doesn't fill out the CSS profile, but how can you still be helpful as an advisor to your student, where that's helping them finish out their state school applications or anything from there, but really kind of making sure that you are set up for success dependent on your students' goals. So if you know that you've done everything you can as an advisor to make sure that they know their options, and that your student has all the correct information, and still decides to maybe not participate in the whole facet of like the Matriculate program, you can still be there as a resource and a way to help support your student in their next steps. Something that we've been seeing already with application decision results, whether that's for QuestBridge or for early decision or early action, what happens if your high school fellow is rejected or deferred. And this is really tough to talk about, but it is okay. And it's okay to feel disappointed in this process. And it's okay to want something and then be told that you didn't get it. But know that this decision that one college makes has nothing to do with another decision another college can make. And as Farish mentioned in the presentation earlier, that really so many schools have different processes, different systems, different ways to review an application, and it's not an algorithm, right? There is no perfect math equation that says the student will then get into this school based off these 4 factors. And, it's tough to say because it feels like, it just feels like very arbitrary and very random. But in reality, sometimes this is what application results can feel like. And I would also ask you as an advising fellow to kind of put yourself back to when you were a senior in high school, getting those rejections. Maybe you didn't get any, but then kind of like being able to empathize and truly like understand that, it's okay to not be perfect. And it's okay for someone to be told no to, but then to say, okay, this happened. What are we doing? Like, how do we move on? How do we stay focused? How do we kind of move on to the next thing, right? Because we want to be at that spot in the spring where we're picking through multiple options. And then that regroup phase, right? So if your high school fellow applied for a decision to a school, was deferred, didn't get it, or was deferred for other decision, how does this maybe affect their list going forward, right? So making sure that like this could honestly be a moment where a lot of our students who could have been successful for their entire academic careers, and this could be the moment that they're first told no, and being able to regroup and to kind of have that grit to really stand up and go like, okay, this is my first no. Like, how do we really make sure that we get to that place in the spring where I have everything to pick from, and these are those places that we can go to. And then lastly, also want to be very cognizant that you are all going through a really busy period right now, with finals coming up and winter break also coming up. It isn't ideal in the timeline for a college application where most of our advisors will go offline during some of the most high need moments. So I think it's very important that advisors are open and honest with this period. So you should be having this conversation with your high school fellow about your availability over finals now. I completely understand that you might not really want to look at a supplemental essay during the day you have to write like a 10-page research paper. So being able to create a system of accountability between yourself and your HSF is important, and something that you've already have probably been working on since the summer, but incredibly, incredibly important as you are also doing a lot and making sure that you are successful in your role as a student in school. So be honest with what you can and can't do. If a student, it gives you something like at 2 a.m. Or at 11 p.m. before like a 12 or before a midnight deadline, being able to have that conversation right away about what is appropriate and what isn't is really what's going to be key in making sure that you can get through this and feel okay. So create a plan, right? The college list should be very close to being finalized. On what day are you submitting what date? These are the things that you can kind of really plan and track for as they're doing it now. Being super cognizant about which days is your HSF submitting an application, right? And to the moment of like, well, I'm going to submit it on this day at this time, and then maybe planning that like text message to congratulate them is always nice. But ensuring that they stay on track here is important. And then again, leverage your network, talk to your head advising fellows, talk to your campus lead. If you feel like that relationship between your student is starting to crumble, as much as you're going through right now as a college student, they're going through a ton right now during their senior year in high school. It's not super abnormal for a student to start ghosting you during this period, to not get back to you right away, or to like maybe not be as accountable to you in this. I think might have been earlier in the summer. So it might take a village here to really get your high school fellow back on track. And so if you feel that you're not making a connection, or that you feel like that things are running behind or things are lagging, really be like, raise your hand, have your head advising fellow be aware of it, have your campus lead be aware of it. So if there is an intervention that needs to happen, that people are here to help you out and be a resource for you in this stage of the process. And then lastly, some checklist items as you finish out the semester. This balanced college list is really important here, and understanding that that is done and that you are applying to that list. Letters of recommendation, that your students have their 2 academic teachers, have their counselor, and have set them up to be submitted for all the regular decision applications. Test scores have been sent to all schools on their college list. If students need to pay to send those test scores in, if they have their fee waivers ready for that, make sure that you know what their plan is to be able to send in test scores. Those required supplemental essays for regular decision applications, those are a lot, making sure those get done. And then the 2 major financial aid documents with FAFSA and CSS. And then ensuring that you know that your student knows how transcripts, school reports, counselor reports, student information is being submitted. Some schools do this very differently. Maybe some schools will do this through Naviance, some schools will mail them in. Having your student, again, being able to advocate to their counselor and understanding how this gets sent in and making sure that they are in a good spot for all of these items is important. So being able to ask your students these questions and making sure that they know the answers is what will, again, have them be in a position to be successful and be in that really great spot in the spring. A couple of last minute milestones. So November 15th passed, that was last Friday. All high school fellows should have completed and submitted a FAFSA. On the HSF survey, as of right now, we are asking for students to indicate that they have completed it. If they haven't, staff is going to start reaching out to high school fellows to make sure that they do. So again, this is a very key milestone for us to make sure the completion of this is happening. So if we are reaching out to you about your student not completing a FAFSA, please make sure to be responsive in those moments. If you know a student is having trouble filling out the FAFSA, please raise your hand and let us know, and we'll see if there's anything else we can do. Same goes for the CSS profile. We'll start to track that next month on December 15th. And that also coincides with our deadline of having all high school fellows submit regular decision applications. We have this deadline in place to really encourage everyone to submit their applications before the winter break, and know that you can go into this break feeling like that you've done all that you're supposed to, and that you feel good and that your students feel good about where they are in this process. If a student is applying to the school on December 31st, you are allowed as an advisor to be offline during that period, and your high school fellow should know that as well. So again, if you have any questions about students submitting applications past this deadline, or if you feel that students aren't at the level or the track that you want them to be, again, raise your hand, let us know, and we'll go from there. But I do think this is it for me. Thank you all again for joining us on this November webinar. This will be our last one until February. So happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays. Again, please reach out to us if you have any questions. Looking forward to really seeing those applications go by, and happy application season. Thank you so much for coming.